Whilst the Spanish Civil War explicitly refers to the series of conflicts that took place between the nationalist coup of 1936 and Republican defeat by 1939, the war also played out ideologically in Europe. Foreign governments, fearful of another great war, discussed intervention and aid, aligning themselves with either Republican-style democracy or fascism, the left or the right, making foreign policy manoeuvres that would change the course of the Civil War. It is in this context that photojournalism, through war photography, was established in attempts to garner foreign aid for both combatants and civilians on the left. Gerda Tauer and her contemporaries have been described as their own kind of international brigade, armed with a camera and ready to fight for the freedom ideals of the Second Republic. Firstly, Tauer's photographs of destruction created anti-war propaganda by evoking powerful emotions in European audiences who have faced the same realities in the Great War. This created a kind of marketable empathy that was useful in getting both neutral and leftist humanitarian organisations on board. For Mirzoeff, visuality is an act of imagination, in which info, images and ideas come together to create a visual account of history, what he calls the authority of the image. Encapsulated by the idiom, I have to see it to believe it. The photo centres on destruction, which fills up almost the whole frame despite the wide angle. Thus, Tauer utilises symbolism to capture the all-consuming feeling of wartime loss and devastation to mobilise European aid to the Republic, suggesting the emerging trade of photojournalism could be used to sway a country's foreign policy. Moreover, Tauer knew that the images would resonate with the victims of German air raids during World War I, and thus, by exposing the allyship between Franco and Hitler and the new Nazi weapons being tested out on Republican Spain, create a common enemy out of fascism by visually associating it with destruction. In this way, her photos acted as a call to end the war before it advanced past Spain into France or England. As Shaber suggests, many saw in the threat to the Republic an attack on their own ideas. The conflation of anti-fascist and anti-war propaganda made the photos more resonant. Tauer cast Spain as a synecdoche for Europe, whereby the Civil War had to end with the defeat of fascism. This marketing strategy aimed to encourage European aid, despite fears of a wider European war, by suggesting that fascism would only advance if not put down in Spain. The ghost of what this smash house has been haunts the image, highlighting precisely what's at stake for the rest of Europe. Tauer, by following attacks like the one here in Brunette, aimed to transmit a kind of solidarity through participation, as Shaber put it. Furthermore, significant developments in photographic technology left cameras more portable and quicker in their ability to capture an event. As a result, the immediate nature of these photographs, able to quickly reach masses through large print runs, made it impossible for post-World War I countries to ignore that a war was happening as they read the paper. A kind of early form of live news, the photos would have felt visually threatening to people in the 1930s, who would draw similarities between the attacks they'd recently witnessed on their own countries. The fragility of their own safety laid bare, living so near to Spain. Tauer's commitment to being close to action cost her her life, showing how much she believed in the power of these action shots for propaganda. Significantly, her pictures of destruction only detail nationalist attacks, never the violence carried out by the left. Tauer's lens was far from politically neutral. To convince Europe to send aid, she created a simplified version of the war where the left represented liberation and Franco's right fascistic dissent. Thus, through propaganda, in the Spanish Civil War, the camera became a weapon in its own right, since its ability to command viewers' attention turned suffering into something actionable. As critics Fehrenbach and Redongo put it, photo propaganda was much more effective than words, more exportable and more accessible. Here is a problem that requires redress. Here are those who suffer. This is how and why they suffer. This is why we are responsible and what we need to do about it. Tauer also used symbolism through the figure of La Miliciana, who was photographed widely by left-wing journalists during the war. In this image, whilst the gun and uniform masculinise the soldier, her femininity remains intact, reflecting the progressive Republican emphasis on freedom and democracy, and thus, subtextually, the nationalist harmful insistence on convention and conformity. As Razon states, the image of the Milicianas marked a radical break from traditional female iconography by presenting women as active, aggressive, and able to fight, characteristics that until then had been associated solely with masculinity. This was reinforced by how the Miliciana subverts the Franquista female. limited to domestic spheres, who needs to be protected by nationalist forces. Whilst nationalism and conservatism are categorically separate, Tara utilised feminist symbolism to conflate the two and represent what was at stake if the nationalists won: freedom, autonomous power, and self-assertion. Thus, refusing to be kept in the domestic sphere, as Franco would wish, made the milicianas a key symbol of resistance, embodying the foundational ideals of democratic Europe, like women's suffrage or autonomy, and by implication associating the right with oppression. This created huge political incentive for European aid, given the threat of the 1930s wave of fascism led by Hitler and Mussolini, as well as worryingly internal characters such as English politician Enoch Powell that suggested the ideology was spreading. The Armed Woman subverts historical narratives of women, incapable of protecting themselves, being used to persuade men to exert their masculinity and vanquish the enemy. Rather than subordinating women to invoke war, Tara hinged the war on their freedom, making women a cornerstone in the fight against fascism, a point of difference through which countries might reassess what they stand for and what they accept when they opt for non-intervention. Moreover, photography here adds a new dimension to propaganda. Razon called it a key medium, as it forms part of the imaginary, such that vision of the future once imagined feels possible. The picture thus evokes a victorious sentiment because it seems to say, we are proud, we are already victorious because we stand for good and freedom, and we can't be faulted if we uphold our values. Shaber has suggested Tara felt the war could be won on the basis of determination and spirit for their cause, as she felt it morally toppled fascism, suggesting this propaganda also aimed to enliven the spirit of republicanism within Spain and potentially realign left-wing factions whose divergences stopped them from defeating Franco. Female combatants originally enlisted by the Republican government were withdrawn after months, after they were slandered and sexualized and blamed for inhibiting Republican victory. The picture thus fights against a retreat on women's progress within the Republican cause, drawing a line through factional differences momentarily, so they can focus on the issue of Franco's advancing army. Similarly to how Tara simplified the war narrative to garner European aid, she polarised the left and right's idealised woman, appealing to what Razon called a shared sense of moral duty, so that the various militias would come together to realise who they were fighting for, and who represented the largest threat to the Republic. In addition to Las Milicianas, Tara also photographed displaced refugee mothers, particularly in her coverage of La Espanda, when between 3,000 to 5,000 refugees were killed on the road out of Malaga after it was captured by nationalists. Like her other photographs of destruction, Tara highlighted the impact of German and Italian bombers working with Franco in an attempt to sway the non-intervention pact, evoking sympathy in post-war Europe, whilst also showing that, in an ominous development of warfare, a large-scale attack had been carried out on people far from any Republican stronghold or city infrastructure. In the words of Anaya and Ray, presentó a través de la serie visual que el objetivo del ataque es la población civil. The distribution of these images was thus vital to the anti-fascist, anti-war narrative necessary to procure European aid, because they carried the story of unheard-of brutality and violence, suggesting that something had to be done in response. Moreover, the images of the displaced family in particular evoke emotional reactions in viewers on two levels. Firstly, as Razon puts it, photographs of displacement appeal to the viewer's self-recognition, such that viewers start to see themselves as ordinary citizens whose lives might also be affected by the growing global spread of fascism. Secondly, we see in the children, one of whom is almost smiling, what Holmes categorised as the deserving child, who deserves enough sympathy to inspire action, but is not too unfamiliar, nor in too dire a situation as to not be acceptable for publishing, reflecting a tactical compromise between the needs of those suffering and the requirements of public taste. Of course, children died in the bombardment, but these were not who Tara would photograph. Children throughout the history of humanitarianism have been the most powerful image for campaign use, but also the most polemical when seen injured or dead, as they threaten to become too provocative. This suggests Tara deliberately photographed children that a post-war Europe will be inclined to help, without rousing volatile intervention anxieties with images of dead or injured children that would be too much to process after the losses of the Great War. Even in the picture of the refugee baby, isolated and bandaged after the Malaga bombing, There's an air of peacefulness. Assuredly she's just sleeping for now, and not dead for now, emphasising that Taro wanted to provoke audiences as much as possible without causing European countries to become insular and turn away from the war. Finally, Taro cast the displaced mother as a Republican hero. She's continued to function, therefore in her care lies a further act of Republican survival and resistance. The mother is not held up as something to be protected as she is in most war narratives, but a great defender. Rather than being confined to the domestic space, she carries it inside her. She carries her children, a mobile carer, symbolising the lengths she will go to not be tied down or occupied by nationalist forces, to remain autonomous in how she brings up her children. In The Things They Carried, a book about the Vietnam War, author Tim O'Brien described the soldiers by analysing what they carried, both the physical objects and intangible trauma of war. Taro uses the symbol of the displaced mother, carrying the physical weight and emotional burden of the lives of her children on her back, so that viewers would associate the rise of fascism with a severe threat to morality, justice, and liberty. Moreover, the mother on the move is also a powerful symbol here, as her care will influence the next generation, making the future reality an incentive for present action. Her fierce yet depleted gaze feels like an exhausted final plea that adds an urgency to the situation. This is reinforced by the montage style that was used to publish the photos in regard, producing a kind of proto-video effect that makes the situation feel all the more immediate and urgent. Overall, photojournalism played a large role in propaganda during the Spanish Civil War, as Taro's photos showed Europe that the fight against fascism could no longer be avoided through urgent portrayals of nationalist violence. Additionally, her iconoclastic images of women created powerful feminist messaging that put the Republicans on the side of freedom and democracy, encouraging not just European aid, but also the tactical unification of Republican militias. Moreover, the improvement of photographic technology, as well as the mass exploitation of the press, meant photography would inform propaganda for the foreseeable, due to its ability to narrate and influence the war in a way words could never have been imagined to.